Miko and Mouse.
Good, you're very attentive. Once upon a time, in a far off land, there was a farmer and he had two sons. One morning he said to them, "Boys, you're old enough now to marry, but in our family, we have our own way of choosing a bride." The older son said, "You told us, father, we must each cut down a tree and see where it points." "That's right," said the farmer. "And then walk that tree till you find a sweetheart who can also weave a fine cloth. That's the way we have done it, and that's how we shall do it." Now the older son already knew whom he wanted to marry. He also knew how to cut a tree. So he cut a tree. His tree fell pointing to the farm where his sweetheart lived. The younger son, whose name was Miko, didn't have a sweetheart, like many of you. But he thought he would try his luck in the town. Well, maybe he cut the tree wrong because it fell pointing to the forest. "Good job, Miko," his brother mocked. "What sweetheart will you find in the forest? A wolf or a fox?" "Never mind," said Miko. "I'll find who I find." The next morning, Miko set off to find himself a sweetheart. He walked through the forest for hours and hours and hours without seeing a single soul. At last, he came upon a cottage deep in the woods. But when he went inside, he saw no one. "Hello there," came a tiny voice. Miko looked around surprised, but the only living thing in sight was a small little mouse standing on the table with its hind legs and looking at Miko with her big bright eyes. Miko said, "Did you say something?" "Of course I did," said the mouse. "Now why don't you tell me your name and what you came here for?" Now Miko felt very odd talking to a little mouse, but out of politeness he replied, "My name is Miko, and I've come here looking for a sweetheart." The mouse squealed in delight. "Why, Miko, I'll gladly be your sweetheart." "But you're only a mouse," said Miko. "That may be true," she said, "but I can still love you faithfully." Now Miko looked into those big bright eyes and thought she really was a nice little mouse. And since he had found no one else in any case, he said, "All right, little mouse, you can be my sweetheart." "Oh, Miko," she said happily, "I promise you won't be sorry." Then Miko said, "Wait a minute, but you also have to weave a cloth." "Now, how can a mouse weave a cloth?" "A mouse can surely weave. You must be tired from your walk, so why don't you rest while I work?" So Miko lay down on the bed and went off to sleep. When the little mouse was sure that Miko was asleep, she picked up a little bell and rang it. And out of the mouse holes of the entire room poured in hundreds of mice into the room. "Hurry," she said, "each of you go and fetch the finest strand of flax that you can find." Then the mice rushed out of the cottage, and 1, 2, 3, back they were with the finest strand of flax. Quickly they put it into a loom and spun it into a cloth. Then they cut the cloth from the loom and tucked it into a tiny nutshell. Then she called, "Hey Miko, wake up, it's time to go home, and here is something for your father." Miko was very sleepy, so he sleepily took the nutshell without realizing what it was, and he said, "Thank you, little mouse." When he went back home, his brother was proudly presenting the cloth from his sweetheart. The farmer looked at the cloth and said, "Strong and fairly even, this will do." And where is your cloth, Miko? Miko blushed and handed him the small little nutshell. His brother said, Miko asked for a cloth and his sweetheart gave him a nut. Ho, ho, ho. But when the farmer opened the nutshell, he pinched at something and started to pull. And out came linen, fine beyond belief, yard after yard after yard after yard. Miko's brother gaped with his mouth open, and Miko did too. There can be no better weaver than Miko's sweetheart, declared the farmer. Tomorrow you will bring both your sweethearts for the wedding. That's how we have done it, and that's how we shall do it. When Miko arrived at the cottage next morning, the little mouse said, Hey Miko, is this the day of a wedding? Miko said, It is, little mouse. Why Miko, what's wrong? How can I bring home a mouse to marry? My brother, my father, the village people will laugh at me and will think that I'm a fool. They might think so, said the mouse. But Miko, what do you think? Miko looked at the little mouse. He thought about how much she loved him and cared for him. And he said, I think you are as sweet as any sweetheart can be. So let them laugh. Today, you will be my bride. Oh, Miko, you made me the happiest mouse in the world, she said. She rang the bell, and to Miko's astonishment, a little carriage raced into the room. It was made from a nutshell and pulled by 4 black rats. Miko lifted her from the table, put her in the carriage, and the rats took off, and carriage sped away from the cottage, and Miko had to run behind it. At last, they reached the farm, and then the spot for the wedding, on the banks of a lovely flowing river. The guests were already there, enjoying themselves, partying. But as Miko's carriage came up, they all grew silent and stared at the little carriage. Miko's brother stood with his bride, gaping in disbelief at the sight before him. He said, That is the stupidest thing I ever saw. And with one kick, sent the carriage, the rats and the mice into the river. And before Miko could do anything, the current swept them away. What have you done? Cried Miko. You killed my sweetheart. Are you crazy? Said his brother. That was only a mouse. She may have been a mouse, said Miko tearfully, but she was really my sweetheart, and I really did love her. He was about to swing at his brother when his father cried out, Hey Miko, look! And all the guests were staring at the downstream, pointing out, crying out in wonder, Look at that! Look at that! Miko turned to the river and to his amazement saw 4 black horses pulling out a carriage out of the stream, and inside was a soaked but lovely princess in a gown of pearly velvet. The carriage rode up along the bank and stopped right before him. Miko, said the princess, aren't you going to help me down? Miko stared blankly for a moment, and then his eyes flew wide open. Are you the little mouse? I surely was, said the princess, laughing, but no longer. A witch enchanted me, and the spell could only be broken by one brother who wanted to marry me and one brother who wanted to kill me. But sweetheart, I need a change from these wet clothes now. And a grand wedding it was. All the village people danced and sang, and Miko's bride was the center of attraction. And when they went back to the village, their cottage had turned into a big castle, and they all lived happily ever after. Mr. Toast.